Picture this. London, 1951. The fog is rolling in off the Thames, clinging to the stone of Whitehall and the steps of the Foreign Office. Inside, typewriters have fallen silent for the night, safes are locked, and a small group of civil servants are gathering in an office with a cake and a few bottles to celebrate a colleague's birthday. They're expecting two men. One is Donald Maclean, head of the American department at the Foreign Office, the senior official in charge of day-to-day relations with the United States. The other is his friend, Guy Burgess. They wait. The clock ticks. Neither man walks through the door. By the time anyone in that building realizes what this means, those two are already standing on a ferry deck in the English Channel, wind in their faces, heading toward France and disappearing into the fog of the Cold War. To Washington, it will soon look like this. Two British diplomats, one who knew almost everything about Anglo-American policy, and one who had mingled in the inner circles of MI5, MI6, and the Foreign Office, have vanished. Later, their faces will show up in Moscow, side by side, as they announce to the world that they have been working for the Soviets for years. One of those faces, always a little flushed, always a little mischievous, belongs to Guy Burgess. He doesn't look like the stereotype of a spy, and that's part of why he was so dangerous. To understand him, you have to go back to Cambridge in the early 1930s. Guy Francis de Moncey Burgess is born in 1911. His father is a Royal Navy officer. He grows up in a world of privilege, Eton for school, Trinity College, Cambridge for university. These are the places where Britain's establishment trains its sons, where you learn not just Latin and history, but the accent, manners, and habits that open doors in Whitehall and Westminster. At Cambridge, Burgess is brilliant, witty, and already a troublemaker. He drinks hard, debates fiercely, and dives into the secret society known as the Apostles, a select group of students who see themselves as an intellectual elite. The world outside the college walls is in crisis. The Great Depression is smashing economies. Hitler is rising in Germany. Mussolini is already in power in Italy. Many in that world of young, well-educated Britons look at their own system, class-bound, unequal, and seemingly incapable of dealing with mass unemployment, and conclude that liberal capitalism is dying. Marxism and the Soviet experiment look to some like the only serious alternative. Burgess is one of them. He reads Marx, he joins the Communist Party, he travels to the Soviet Union in 1934, and, for all its obvious problems, is impressed by what he thinks is a society moving in a new direction. He comes home more convinced than ever. Britain's future, he decides, lies not with America and capitalism, but with Russia and socialism. That conviction makes him a prime target. In the mid-1930s, Soviet intelligence has people on the ground in Cambridge and London looking for exactly this kind of recruit, young, well-connected, ideologically committed. Arnold Deutsch and other illegal NKVD officers quietly approach students and recent graduates who have the right combination of brains, class, and belief. Burgess is one of those they sign up. He gets code names, Madchen, Paul, and Hicks, and a simple set of instructions. Stop being a public communist. Never again wave a red flag or sign a petition. Instead, disappear into the establishment. Get a job in the institutions that run Britain. Feed us from inside. He does not go directly into the Foreign Office. His route is more chaotic, more Burgess. In 1936, he lands at the BBC and the talks department as a radio producer. It's a perfect vantage point. His job is to arrange broadcasts and interviews with leading politicians, diplomats, and thinkers. He meets Winston Churchill, cabinet ministers, rising MPs. Behind the scenes, he hears what they really think about rearmament, appeasement, Hitler, and the League of Nations. He passes those conversations to Soviet handlers. At the same time, he is already sniffing around British intelligence. MI6 officer David Footman befriends him and introduces him to his superior, Valentine Vivian. They see in Burgess a useful, well-connected, and enthusiastic man. For the next year and a half, he does small, unpaid tasks for MI6, acting as a freelance asset. He's not on the books as a formal officer, but he sits in their offices, goes to their briefings, hears what they are worried about. From Moscow's point of view, this is ideal. A double door has opened. In March 1938, MI6 creates a new branch, Section D, to handle sabotage, subversion, and other forms of special warfare short of actual fighting. Burgess is pulled in as a full member. He becomes the Section D representative on the Joint Broadcasting Committee, liaising with the Foreign Office and the BBC to coordinate anti-Hitler broadcasts into Germany. He is now wearing 3 hats: BBC producer, MI6 officer, Soviet agent. In 1938, Britain and France wobble on the edge of war over Czechoslovakia. Neville Chamberlain flies to Munich to meet Hitler. Behind the scenes, frantic messages fly between London and Paris. Burgess, as MI6's man, sometimes serves as a back channel between Chamberlain and French Prime Minister Édouard Daladier. He sees drafts of letters, summaries of conversations, and internal British views of the crisis. He passes those to Moscow, too. Among the messages he sends is one that tells Stalin something crucial. British leaders do not see an alliance with the Soviet Union as necessary and are trying to manage the German problem without committing to the USSR. For a paranoid leader in the Kremlin, already suspicious of Western motives, this is confirmation of his worst fears. It helps push him towards signing the Nazi-Soviet pact in August 1939, a pact that shocks the world and reshapes the start of World War II. To a reminder that espionage can change not just what one side knows, but what the other side decides to do. In 1939, war comes anyway. Britain declares war on Germany. Section D is folded into a larger Special Operations Executive. Burgess's work shifts, but the core stays the same. He is in the room where people discuss unconventional warfare, political operations, and propaganda. He reports on all of it. He eventually moves away from MI6 for a time and returns briefly to the BBC, then slides over to MI5, the Domestic Security Service. In each role, he gains access to different parts of Britain's war and post-war planning. Politicians, generals, and civil servants treat him as our kind of man. Public school, Cambridge, always ready with a joke, always happy to help. They do not see the other life. By 1944, he shifts again, this time into the heart of foreign policy. He joins the Foreign Office News Department as a press officer. That might sound peripheral, but in practice it means he reads a vast array of internal papers so he can brief journalists and foreign correspondents accurately. He sees telegrams from embassies, drafts of policy statements, and the minutes of cabinet and committee meetings. He continues to pass things to the Soviets, not individual secrets, but a torrent. In 1945, he becomes personal assistant and then confidential secretary to Hector McNeill, the junior minister under Foreign Secretaries Ernest Bevin and later others. McNeill is deeply involved in Britain's post-war foreign policy, including relations with the U.S., the emerging Cold War, and the United Nations. As McNeill's right hand, Burgess sees everything. He carries McNeill's files. He sits in on meetings. He drafts letters and memos. He has access not only to the contents of documents, but to codebooks and one-time pads used to encrypt British communications. In one 6-month period, he secretly photographs and sends to Moscow the contents of 693 files, more than 2,000 pages of material. Those files include drafts of Operation Unthinkable, Churchill's highly classified contingency plan for a possible war against the Soviet Union after World War II, as well as Imperial General Staff assessments and Foreign Office papers on Germany, Eastern Europe, and relations with the USSR. He also sends copies of code keys. If you're sitting in an American living room, think about what that means. The British had put enormous effort into building secure codes. They had learned at Bletchley Park how devastating it is when someone breaks your cipher. They knew about Enigma. They knew how much advantage they had gained over the Germans by reading their traffic. Now imagine that inside your own Foreign Office, a man you trust has quietly handed your own keys to the other side. The Soviets don't just get the text, they get the method. They can use that to read other messages that Burgess never touched. Guy Burgess is not a quiet, careful spy. He's often drunk, indiscreet, chaotic. Historian Andrew Lowney notes that between 1941 and 1945, he sends 4,604 documents to his Soviet handlers, overwhelming them and leading to suspicions that he was a double agent. Moscow actually worries that someone who provides that much might be a British plant. He is not. He is just that reckless. He keeps moving. By 1950, he has been appointed second secretary in the British Embassy in Washington, D.C. It's a high-profile job for someone with a history of drunken misbehavior, but his connections and reputation smooth the way. In Washington, he lives with suspicion from some American officials who are put off by his heavy drinking, sloppy manners, and loud criticisms of U.S. policy, but he still has the right badge and the right clearances. From there, his story merges with Donald Maclean's. By this point, American codebreakers working on the Venona project have, through years of patient cryptanalysis, started to read fragments of Soviet wartime communications. They see references to a British diplomat in Washington, codenamed Homer, who has passed thousands of documents to the Soviets about atomic policy and post-war planning. They share this with MI5. MI5 looks at the pattern of postings and personal details and concludes that Homer must be Donald Maclean in the Foreign Office. They decide to move on Maclean, to question him, confront him, and either flip him or charge him. Kim Philby, another Cambridge spy, is in Washington as the senior MI6 liaison to U.S. intelligence. He learns enough about the tightening circle around Homer to realize one of his comrades is about to be exposed. He alerts Moscow. Moscow alerts its people in London. They select Guy Burgess, now in Washington, to go back and help Maclean escape. Officially, this will look like a disciplinary recall. Guy Burgess has already angered U.S. authorities with a wild road trip down the East Coast, collecting speeding tickets in multiple states. The British ambassador seizes the chance to send him home. He returns to England in May 1951, meets Anthony Blunt and KGB officer Yuri Modin, and passes on the warning: Maclean is about to be interrogated. Together, they arrange the escape plan. Originally, Burgess promises Philby he will not defect himself. If he vanishes as well, suspicion will inevitably fall on Philby, endangering his position. But Moscow weighs the risks and decides Maclean cannot handle the escape alone. They order Burgess to go with him. Burgess agrees. On May 25, 1951, they execute the plan. They drive from London to Southampton. They board a ferry to St. Malo in France under false names. From there, they travel across France and into Switzerland, then on to the Soviet zone in Germany, and finally to Moscow, shepherded by Soviet handlers. Back in London and Washington, shockwaves hit. 2 British diplomats disappear on the same day. One, Maclean, is the man at the center of Anglo-American policy. The other, Burgess, has been inside MI5, MI6, the BBC, and the Foreign Office, delivering British secrets to the Soviets for years. For the U.S., this is more than a scandal. It's a revelation. It shows that the Soviets have managed to infiltrate not just one, but multiple points at the top of British government. It feeds a growing perception in Washington that London's security vetting is inadequate, too trusting of class and connections, and not serious enough with technical counterintelligence. What makes this even more striking is that the tools that first exposed the Cambridge Ring, tools like Venona, are essentially American. While the Soviets relied heavily on human spies like Burgess, Maclean, and Fuchs to compensate for their technical and industrial lag, the US and UK were investing in signal intelligence, cryptanalysis, and early computing. Projects like Venona did not stop Burgess and Maclean in time to prevent all the damage, but they did expose them. They showed that even the most carefully placed human networks could be dragged into the light by mathematical analysis and patient machine-assisted work. From the Soviet point of view, that was frightening. They believed their one-time pad systems were unbreakable. They were not. They had reused key pages by mistake. American and British codebreakers, applying technology and logic, exploited that tiny crack in the armor and turned it into a wide opening. They found the code names, they mapped them to real people, they forced the Soviets to burn some of their best assets. Burgess, Maclean, later Philby, before those assets could do even more. Back in the USSR, Guy Burgess is not welcomed into an open society of gratitude. He is taken to a safe house in Kuyisibov, interrogated at length, and then slowly reintroduced to life under Soviet eyes. He is given an apartment, monitored, and allowed to move through Moscow's semi-privileged circles. He does some translation and analysis work, but he is too notorious, too chaotic, and too unreliable to be trusted with anything central. He misses London. He misses good drink, good conversation, the freedom to say outrageous things without someone in a gray suit taking notes. He remains a convinced Stalinist, according to friends and biographers, hating liberals more than imperialists, and insisting that Britain's future lay with Russia, not America. But he also drinks himself deeper into ill health. In 1963, he dies in Moscow at 52, his liver destroyed, his dream of being a hero of the revolution reduced to a file in a KGB archive and a modest grave in a foreign land. For Americans watching his story today on a screen powered by technologies unimaginable in 1951, there is a particular way to look at it. On one level, Burgess stands for the vulnerabilities of Western democracies, a reminder that open systems can be infiltrated, that trust can be misplaced, that even top universities and prestigious institutions can produce people who turn against the very societies that raised them. On another level, though, his story highlights a different kind of strength. The Soviet Union had to recruit people like Burgess precisely because its own system could not generate comparable knowledge about the West on its own. Its press was censored, its academic life constrained, its laboratories starved of resources. If Moscow wanted to know what London and Washington were planning, it couldn't rely on publicly available information or independent analysis. It had to send men to steal. The United States, by contrast, increasingly built systems to understand its adversary that did not depend on betrayal. It built code-breaking sensors, it launched reconnaissance satellites, it developed analytic teams combining linguists, mathematicians, engineers, and historians. It leveraged its own open information environment where scholars, journalists, and think tank analysts could debate Soviet intentions and capabilities and integrated that with clandestine sources. The side that needed traitors in Cambridge over and over again was not the one with a superior information culture. The side that eventually didn't need them was. Guy Burgess spent his adult life trying to help a closed system keep pace with a more technologically advanced and open adversary. He succeeded in the short term, feeding secrets that helped Stalin navigate alliances, anticipate Western moves, and stiffen his bargaining position. But in the longer term, the system he served could not match the West's capacity to innovate, adapt, and learn even from its own failures. The technologies that allowed Americans and Britons to crack Soviet codes, track Soviet missiles, map Soviet deployments, and monitor Soviet communications would grow more sophisticated every decade. by the Soviet Union would double down on its reliance on human sources abroad and repression at home, afraid that the kind of openness that fuels technological progress would undermine its political control. In a way, Guy Burgess's life encapsulates that tension. He is, on the surface, a triumph of Soviet recruitment, but he is also a symptom of Soviet dependence. He is proof that for a time, the Kremlin's most reliable window into Western decision-making was not its own science or its own technology, but a group of young men seduced at Cambridge and planted into the heart of British power. For Americans, there is a particular kind of pride in knowing that despite that edge in human spies, it was the West's edge in technology, organization, and openness that ultimately proved more durable. The story of Guy Burgess is not just a tale of betrayal. It is also a story of how, in the long competition between a closed empire and an open alliance, the side that built better tools to see the world, machines, codes, satellites, and networks, didn't need to rely on the misfits of its rival. The side that did is gone. The side that didn't is the one you live in.